Our next speaker is Adam Friedman. He's with a partner with McElroy, Sullivan, Miller, and Weber LLP, and he's going to talk to us about why and how districts can support recycling of oil and gas-produced water. So let's welcome Adam.
Good afternoon. One more. Why and how districts can support recycling of oil and gas-produced water. It's starting to sink in that my firm represents a bunch of oil and gas operators, and I'm here to propose ideas of how you all can throw wrinkles in their water supplies. So bear with me with a little bit of cold feet, but I think that if you were to talk to some of the operators in the field, you would find that they recognize that this is the future. They are on board. Some of the bigger operators are doing big things to try to recycle this water, and everyone's got a role to play. And I think the districts may have an opportunity here to help that and play that role. So this first became an issue for me back in 2013 when the Railroad Commission was proposing changing its rules for saltwater disposal wells. They were looking at heightening some of the protections of the groundwater quality, and I, on behalf of a handful of groundwater districts, were submitting comments and trying to heighten those protections and ensure the USDWs and the groundwaters were protected. And it was during that process that I saw this picture. It was actually from the Texas Tribune. And what that is a dot represents various numbers of SWDs, saltwater disposal wells, across the state of Texas. And what you see at the top is something that I've added, is that there's actually 7,744 active saltwater disposal wells in the state of Texas. So when I saw that, we were sitting there, we were working on it from a groundwater quality standpoint, but what really stuck with me was what does that mean from a quantity standpoint? How much water are we disposing of out of the cycle, never to be used again? And I went back to start looking into that, but then it rained a lot. And as Representative Larson said, people tend to forget about the drought concerns and the needs for reusing and concepts like that when that happens. And we got a lot of rain, the drought sort of subsided. But a couple years later, I decided to really dig in, and this is what I found, that from 2011 to 2017, 291 billion gallons of water was disposed down a disposal well, never to be used again. Now, that's commercial disposal. That means that when you apply for a well at the Railroad Commission, you have to designate whether it's for commercial purposes and you're going to accept wastewater by truck from various leases from various operators. That's what this is. This does not even include the non-commercial disposal wells, which are sort of in-house wells, if you will, on the lease, operated by the operator for their particular disposal. A lot more wastewater that's going downhole that's not reflected in these numbers. In 2017, you see 50 billion gallons alone. That's about where we're averaging every year. And I'm from Austin, so to me, to make the point, that's about 2.5 times the residential use that Austin had in 2015. It's a lot of water. This just breaks it down over the years. Annual, in 2016, I've given this a similar presentation to an oil and gas group, and it was, before we had more data on 2017. It looked as though maybe some of the recycling was starting to make a dent. But as you can see, just last year, we're back to the most disposed commercial wastewater that we've seen in the last 7 years. And let me also point out that when I talk about produced water, that really it's oil and gas wastewater. We're talking about produced water that is formation water. Generally, that refers to the formation water that's already in the ground that comes up to the surface as part of the production. But it also includes the flowback water, which we generally refer to as part of the injected fluids that help break up the shale, and then together those come up, and that's encompassed here by the term produced water. Sometimes I refer to it as wastewater, but that can be argued that it's a broad term. But generally speaking, we're talking about the flowback and the formation water together. So last year, 50.6 billion gallons disposed down disposal wells. And this breaks it down by district. This just to give you an idea, and there's more districts that see this issue, but these were some of the ones I tried to get: Permian and Eagleford and Barnett. I didn't get one, I don't think, from the Panhandle up on my slide here, but you can see you've got in Reeves County 211 active disposal wells, 176 in Upper Trinity. The next column over, commercial injected volume in 2016. It's a lot of acre. Those are in acre feet. Those are no longer in gallons. Just to give you an idea, when you talk about your MAGs and DFCs and permitted volumes of water, this really can show you the amount of water we're talking about. And now that's 2016 volumes, and that's just because the way that you report these volumes, the Railroad Commission is an annual report. And so, in other words, they're still reporting each month this year to reflect back last year. So 2016 is the last year where we have all of the reports for sure in. The numbers are going to be just as much, if not more, over the last 2 years. The next column over is 2018 oil production, only through May of this year, and then the next column is gas, just because depending, like Upper Trinity, that's Barnett, it's more gas-oriented. But you can see lots of production of oil going on in these districts, while at the same time, lots of disposal going down wells. This just gives you an idea that the produced water, this problem is not going away, it's getting bigger. This is the per day production of oil in the Permian. You can see as of this year, it's through March, they were doing about 1.9 billion barrels a day. There was a Wall Street Journal article last week that really hit on this whole recycling issue. It was pretty good timing for my presentation here, but they're anticipating that it could be as much as 5 million barrels a day just in the Permian. That's more than Iran, the entire country right now. And when you get anywhere from 3 or 4 barrels of water back for every barrel of oil you produce, or as much as 10 barrels of water for every barrel of oil you produce, you can see where this problem is escalating. And that's what the Wall Street Journal article was emphasizing, is that hundreds of millions of dollars are being invested by private equity firms trying to not get just the technology, but also the infrastructure, the pipelines, the midstream that can take the water away and recycle it in a cost-effective way. Okay, so that sort of builds the issue. I would say that I call that the opportunity. That vast amount of water is really the stage that we're operating under. These are sort of the issues of why I think it matters. Everybody in here is familiar with the State Water Plan. And the most recent version, 2017, they're anticipating a 4.8 million acre-foot shortage in Texas in drought conditions. Just for context, that's 1.56 trillion gallons, 4 times Lake Travis, a lot of water, a lot of activity going on to try to bridge that gap and address this issue. No reason why this produced water recycling isn't an opportunity to also contribute to that solution. I think I did the math where 50 billion gallons is like 3% of 1.5 trillion. So it's not a lot on a percentage, but it is still a lot of water, and it certainly should be looked at. This is just to show the drought conditions. I know things have improved, and Representative Larson mentioned this earlier, that things are better, but that in 6 months, we could be looking at a much different map than what this shows right here. And just to build on that, this was from the U.S. Drought Monitor. This was 1 year before the all red that you just saw. Just sort of an example of how quick things can change, which I think was the point that he was trying to make this afternoon or this morning. It won't take much. I know in Austin, I think we've had 3 straight weeks of 100 plus without rain, so certainly can get there. This is from a Bureau of Economic Geology study. This shows, not just that we are disposing of a lot of water, and using a lot of water for fracking purposes, but this shows drawdown locally. When this issue first started becoming on the radar of using fresh water and using groundwater for fracking, there were some talking points and some supported studies that said, oh, well, it's just 1% of our statewide water use, which probably was true. But the important thing to keep in mind is that locally it can be much greater. And this was a study to show just that. They in 2.3% of the western portion of the Eagle Ford, there was a 200-foot drawdown that they attributed to frack water, to groundwater being used for fracking. And so it's important to keep in mind, not only do we have this opportunity to recycle and use that water for operations, that helps alleviate the pressure that we can put on our aquifers if we can continue to do that. Building off of that point, the drawdown of our aquifers for frac use, this was from the Water Development Board. You can see statewide there's 3,200 water wells that are dedicated to fracking. 30,000 water wells dedicated to rig supply. And then I've broken it down by groundwater district where you can sort of see the numbers of wells that are producing water for that purpose. Now, that Water Development Board doesn't tell you whether they are active or still pumping. It just has the well reports. And so you've got to keep an asterisk next to those figures. But the point is there are a lot of wells that are dedicated for supplying groundwater for hydraulic fracturing operations, while at the same time we've got 50 billion gallons a year going downhole not to help solve that problem and not to be used for fracking. So that's sort of the water supply issue. I mean, that's sort of one policy ground why recycling is important. This is the second, is the seismic activity. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it because it's obviously not as directly related to districts as the groundwater supplies and the water issue is. But this is a serious driver for the future and why recycling is becoming even more important. This is Oklahoma. I was going to try and play this link. I don't know if it's going to work or not, but this is an animated video, and I've taken a screenshot from the USGS website, and those represent a seismic activity of 3.0 magnitude or higher. And that date where I have screenshots in the middle of 2014. So we're going to watch it. The important takeaway is that before 2009, Oklahoma was registering 2 earthquakes per day. 2 seismic activities of 3.0 per day. After 2015, they're averaging 2 seismic activities a day. I'm not sure I said that right. 2 a year in 2009, and then 2015 is 2 a day. So that's the big takeaway. I guess the animation is not going to show up, but it's worth Googling. It's worth watching. By the end of this animated video, it's covered. Earthquakes, all seismic activity all over. And they're starting to shut in wells, lower pressures on their disposals, sort of trying to alleviate that in Oklahoma. We're not quite there yet in Texas, but we've certainly taken note. The TexNet, they're doing a lot of seismic activity studying. When you apply for a disposal well permit at the Railroad Commission, you now have to show the seismic activity within 100 square miles. They're starting to look at that issue. And now my clicker's not working. All right, we're back. This shows you Texas's seismic activity. Where am I on time? 15 minutes. Okay, so just same website, USGS, just shows you Texas seismic activity. This is actually 2.5 magnitude and higher. I'm not sure why the difference, but the point is still the same. You see, I think near Pecos, there was a 3.6 last year, or maybe in 2016, starting to happen. I think this is a good slide because it really does show you the difference from Oklahoma and Texas, and there's definitely faulting issues and a lot of science that goes into this. But the bottom line is you couple the water supply issue with the seismic activity issue, and in my opinion, it becomes a no-brainer to start trying to recycle this water. And I don't think I'm alone because that's where this is headed. Oh yeah, it's on there. 3.6 in Reeves County and Pecos County area. TexNet just showing that Texas is definitely doing some research and trying to get its hand on the issue. So, again, not going to touch much on this, but just so that everybody's aware, when you do recycle this water, you do have to get, there's 2 sets of framework if you want to recycle this water under the Railroad Commission's jurisdiction. Back in 2013, they decided that they were going to help facilitate recycling, and they created what they call non-commercial recycling, and you don't have to have a permit. This is allows an operator to contract a third party to come on their lease. There are a lot of companies doing this, and it's sort of a smaller scale. It makes it quicker for them, and it's right on their lease, so they can reuse it right away in their fracking operations. And the Railroad Commission decided to help facilitate that. They weren't going to require a permit. They also passed a law to address some groundwater ownership issues. They've protected a recycler that once you receive that water, it's your water. Once you're a recycler and someone's brought it to you, there was some question about landowners maybe claiming that they own that water. There's a little bit of a gray issue there still. I'm not going to belabor it today, but the legislature did take another step to try to help facilitate recycling. This is what you might see as a non-commercial recycler. It looks like a trailer. Then there's commercial, and this is where I think, I would hope to see the future go. I mean, this is a big operation. You actually have to get a permit, so there is some regulatory guideline, hurdles to get through. But this is the big scale type recycling, and it's been available since 2014. And here in 2018, there's one permitted facility. So that may be the future. I don't know if this is the actual facility. This is from the company's website that's permitted to have the facility. You can see the two huge pits. They're 500 million, I'll say that right, 500,000 barrel pits. Hold a lot of water, but only one in the state. Got some room to go. So these are some ideas that have been kicked around to try to increase the recycling volumes. And there's different ways about going about doing this. One of them is fees. Oklahoma state rep tried to propose a 5-cent per barrel fee for every barrel of water that gets disposed down a disposal well. That didn't really go anywhere. I suspect we would probably have similar pushback to try to do something like that in Texas. Ohio does actually charge 5 cents per barrel, and they've got it split up in regulatory jurisdictions, just like the Railroad Commission does. And if you're taking water from one jurisdiction from an oil well and disposing of it in a different jurisdiction, they charge 20 cents per barrel. And I've got a note here that if Texas were to charge a 5 cent per barrel disposal fee, we would have generated about $50 million per year from that. And ideally that might help incentivize recycling as opposed to disposal. Perhaps the most, and none of this has really been tested in Texas. I mean, these are ideas coming from other states facing these issues. Pennsylvania sends a lot of their water to Ohio. They don't really allow disposal in Pennsylvania, so that's why Ohio's probably taken steps towards this. Probably the most reasonable path forward, if Texas were to create some sort of severance tax incentive for the operators, that for every some 1,000 barrels of produced water that gets recycled, you get some tax break, some tax benefit from your oil production. I think that's sort of an incentivized proposal that might actually get traction. Regulatory, legislative fixes, there's certainly a role there. The permitting process at the Railroad Commission is pretty straightforward. That doesn't seem to be the impediment to those more of those commercial recyclers. And we know that there's no real regulatory impediment for the non-commercial recyclers. So, they could try to expedite the permitting process. There's a financial assurance issue that is causing some applicants problems, where they were having to put up millions of dollars to cover the closure costs in the event something they closed down and went wrong. But that I don't think that's the major hurdle there. The Railroad Commission really has acted towards trying to support these efforts, and I think that they would tell you they'd like to see more of it. And infrastructure, I mean, that's a big one. The cost of disposal has always been cheaper than recycling, and that's obviously been a big impediment to why it hasn't picking up more steam. But now we're seeing that the cost to dispose water down a well, the vast majority of that is the trucking costs. Almost $2 per barrel to take the water from point A of the production at the well to a disposal well. it may not cost but 50 cents to put it down the well, but that combination is still cheaper depending on who you talk to than recycling, and how you look at, the offset costs. If you recycle and you reuse that water, then you're not having to buy fresh water as an operator, so you might neutralize some of the costs there. But at such a high cost of trucking the water, even if we go towards recycling, we've got to come up with a solution. And the infrastructure, the pipelines, can really be a mechanism for doing that. And so that's a lot of this money that's being invested in is in part for that infrastructure. But the legislature can certainly help with that. Okay, so we've talked about what other entities can do in the state and the roles that they can play. So I started to get to thinking about, well, what can districts do? How can they help address these issues? I don't know exactly how much of a problem the districts are facing with drawdown of each of their aquifers and their regions from freshwater or brackish water, any water being used for fracking. But these are ideas to confer with your general councils and confer amongst yourselves on whether these are steps that are warranted in your district to help with some of these issues. And I just sort of say that at the outset, that this is a dialogue that I'm initiating. I'm not suggesting that this is legal advice and go forth. I'm encouraging you all to have this discussion, but these are sections of the Chapter 36 that I think lend support for taking action, and I think there's an important role for the districts to play. Obviously, the purpose, I think that gives you a broad mandate for protection and preserving the aquifers. And then what do you get to do? You get to adopt rules. And it's pretty broad rulemaking authority. You guys are all familiar with this. I've sort of emphasized the conserving and preserving and protecting the groundwater. I think that gives you a blanket authority to take steps towards protecting your aquifers from the drawdown for oil and gas operations. Now, depending on how you interpret the exemption in 36.117, your district may require registration of one of these wells. You may even require a permit. Most of what I've seen is that tracks the language in 36.117. If it's for rig supply versus hydraulic fracturing operations, and then you interpret it amongst yourselves on what you're going to require. If you don't require a permit at this point in your district, maybe you want to reconsider that. If you do require a permit, I think there's support in 36.117G that would suggest that when you're permitting water wells for hydraulic fracturing operations, you have the ability to require certain permit conditions. And I'll just read that. It's the third one there. I can't really see that one. A district may not deny an application for a permit to drill and produce water for hydrocarbon production activities if the application meets all applicable rules as promulgated by the district. Now, I know that sounds like you can't do something. That means you got to issue the permit, but I think what it tells you is that the application has to meet all the applicable rules. And in the context of hydrocarbon production, I think that lends support. There's obviously contemplation of permit conditions associated with hydraulic fracturing production. So maybe a district doesn't like seeing fresh, clean water being used for fracking. Maybe they want to consider putting a permit element or a condition that says, yeah, we will issue a permit for hydraulic fracturing operations, but we're going to make you show us that water is greater than 3,000 TDS. Maybe you're going to put in a permit condition that says when you apply, you've got to show us how you're going to recycle 30% of the amount of acre feet that we allot in your permit for use. I think it was Upper Trinity that requires a report on their registered wells, annual reports or quarterly reports for water use. I think there are mechanisms available to sort of enforce this. Another provision of the Water Code which requires the permit can include any conservation-oriented methods. One of them was a conservation plan, I believe. See if I left that off my list here. But you can ask for a conservation plan as part of the permit application process. What is the scope of that authority? What does that allow you as a district to ask for before you authorize the use of this water? Management plan, every permit has got to be consistent with your management plan. Maybe there's an opportunity to include some conservation measures in your management plan that a permit would need to be consistent with. And then finally, with the more of an incentive-based idea is with fees. Maybe there's an opportunity to, if you charge a production fee, either on the permitted amount or on the amount actually produced, you can set your fee for that type of water, water that's going to be dedicated for hydraulic fracturing operations, and you can offer a reduced fee if the operator or the applicant, the landowner, can show that a certain percentage is going to be recycled. I think that's that's more similar to like the severance tax idea from the state. It's more of a financially incentivized way of increasing the recycling that goes on. I included on the bottom there with under 36205C, you can set a fee for any water authorized under a permit. So that would, if you do interpret the exemption to allow you to require a permit for hydraulic fracturing, you could set a fee on that water under this provision. The 36205F gives you authority to set fees under water produced from water produced on a well that's been exempt under 36.117 if that water is sold. So I think that's something to look at, is if the landowner is the applicant and they're reselling that water to the operator, you may still have an opportunity to work this fee incentivized plan to get more recycling. So those are pretty much my ideas. Just in summary, this is an excerpt from an op-ed from the Houston Chronicle that a mentor of mine had published right after Harvey, and really sort of just hits on where we are in terms of sustainability. And I don't know, it really resonated with me. And he just says, we're living in a time when the earth is filling up with humans and human impacts. Yet we have value sets, policies, and thinking that were developed during a time when the world was relatively empty of people and impacts. We are in a different time period now. And he sort of goes on to say the future, which is about the green and the gray coming together, merging, cooperating, and problem solving together. And so that's sort of where I see, the oil and gas industry and the groundwater districts and the state, they're not always on the same side, but this is a real opportunity. It's an issue where I think it can be a win-win for everybody. And sometimes you just have to work with those that are opposed to you. And if you're not a Game of Thrones fan, I'm sorry, but these two are two of my favorites, and they were opposed to each other for hundreds of years, and they've come together to fight their common enemy, because if they don't, they're all going to be dead, and drought is coming. So with that, I guess I'm done. I mean, I've got tons of stuff to talk about. This is a very complex issue. I don't mean to, package it into such a short period of time. Lots of considerations, but the bottom line is there's a lot of water that's going downhole, never to be used again, and I think we can change that.